Gaza, why so many journalists have been killed by Israel. From October 7, 2023 onward, the Gaza Strip became the deadliest place in modern history for journalists. Hundreds of journalists and media workers, overwhelmingly Palestinian reporters, cameramen and editors working in Gaza, have been killed while trying to report. International monitoring groups, press freedom organizations, and the UN have repeatedly documented these deaths and have demanded independent investigations. What happened? The plain facts. Large numbers. Multiple organizations report very high and growing totals of journalists and media workers killed in the Gaza war. The Committee to Protect Journalists (CPJ), Reporters Without Borders (RSF), the International Federation of Journalists (IFJ), and UN agencies have all published counts and name lists, and those counts have risen throughout 2024 to 2025. These counts differ depending on definitions and verification method, but all show extraordinary and unprecedented losses among media workers covering Gaza. Where and how? Most deaths occurred inside Gaza and were caused by airstrikes, artillery, drone strikes or sniper/fire incidents while journalists were covering reporting tasks, at their homes, near hospitals or in places where media were sheltering. Several high-profile incidents involved strikes on locations known to host journalists or near media tents and hospital gates. Independent monitoring and condemnation. UNESCO, CPJ, IFJ, RSF and many leading news organizations have condemned the killings and have called for prompt, independent, impartial investigations into the deaths of journalists. The ICRC and international humanitarian law experts consistently remind that journalists are civilians and must be protected unless directly taking part in hostilities. Why some accuse the Israeli government and the IDF of responsibility? There are two separate questions. A. Were journalists killed as collateral casualties of broad military operations? And B. Were some journalists deliberately targeted? Israel's official position in many cases has been that strikes aim at military targets, Hamas operatives, weapon caches, command nodes, and that civilian casualties, including journalists, are tragic collateral damage in a high-intensity urban battlefield. The Israeli military also asserts that Hamas operates inside dense civilian infrastructure, that militants embed in or near civilian structures, including buildings used by media or hospitals, and that this complicates targeting. This is the public military justification. Press freedom groups and many news organizations counter that the scale and pattern of strikes, including strikes on media facilities, repeated hits on journalists' homes, and documented strikes on tents and locations sheltering reporters, indicate that many journalists were not merely accidental victims but were killed in circumstances that deserve investigation for potential deliberate or reckless targeting. RSF and CPJ have accused Israeli forces of strikes that are incompatible with the protection owed to civilians and have demanded accountability. Independent UN and NGO statements have repeatedly urged investigations and in some cases called for international probes. The volume of fatalities and the number of media facilities damaged or destroyed have amplified calls for transparent, independent investigations. Legal framework. What international law says. Under the Geneva Conventions and customary international humanitarian law, journalists covering war/genocide are civilians and must be protected unless they take direct part in hostilities. Civilian objects, including media offices and homes of journalists, are protected unless they are legitimate military objectives. Attacks that deliberately target civilians or that are carried out without precautions to avoid civilian harm can be unlawful and amount to war crimes. International bodies, UNESCO, ICRC, and legal scholars have repeatedly emphasized these obligations. Documented patterns and key examples. Several incidents crystallized international outrage and illustrated the patterns observers describe. Strikes on media tents and hospital gates. Multiple organizations documented strikes on locations used by journalists for shelter or reporting, including tents outside hospitals. Those attacks killed several journalists and were condemned by press organizations. Deaths of named reporters. Al Jazeera, Reuters, AP, and many local outlets lost reporters and camera staff. High-profile deaths, for example, well-known Al Jazeera journalists and freelance photojournalists, drew immediate condemnation and calls for investigation. Accusations of false claims. In some cases, Israeli military statements have described individuals as militants after strikes. Press organizations and independent investigators have disputed those claims and said that the deceased were clearly identifiable journalists. Such contradictions fuel the insistence on independent verification. What independent monitors recommend? Prompt, independent, and transparent investigations into all killings of journalists. Full protection for journalists and unfettered access for international media to verify facts on the ground. Many foreign reporters were barred from entering Gaza for long periods, increasing reliance on local journalists. Accountability where international law was violated. Why the death toll is so high, structural reasons. Urban warfare plus population density. Gaza is one of the most densely populated territories in the world. Combat in such terrain multiplies civilian risk. Media working in the gap. Because foreign journalists were often denied access, the burden of reporting fell heavily on Palestinian journalists in Gaza. People who could not evacuate and who had to document basic humanitarian realities. That concentration of local reporters increased their exposure to harm. Targeting or reckless conduct. Where evidence exists that media personnel or media infrastructure were struck repeatedly, monitoring groups conclude the strikes were unlawful or at least required independent investigation. Annex. Names. A substantial compiled list of journalists killed in Gaza, sourced. Below is a substantial list compiled from monitoring organizations, CPJ, RSF, IFJ, UNESCO, major media reports and aggregated lists. Because the number kept changing and verification is ongoing, I label this not exhaustive, but it includes many of the names verified and reported by those organizations. For a continuously updated full list, see CPJ, RSF, IFJ, and the Wikipedia compilation, all cited after the list. Selected names of journalists and media workers killed in Gaza, 2023 to 2025. Compiled from CPJ/RSF/IFJ/media reports. Names appear as reported by monitoring organizations and news outlets. Abdelkader Bey, Abdullah Baris, Abu Ali Ajwa, Adam Abu Harbid, Ahlam Nafeth al-Talyalai, Ahmad al-Shaya, Ahmed Abu Auris, Ahmed Abu Aziz, Ahmed Badir, Ahmed Khalja, Allah Hashim, Al-Hassan, various local reporters, Amna Hamid, Anas al-Sharif, Arid Shaheen, Arij, freelance lists, Ashraf Abu, variants reported as cameraman, Ayman Haniyeh, Ayman Mohammed al-Garbawi, Bahar Kasha, Bashir Abu al-Shar, Bayan Abu Sultan, Bilal Abu Matar, Fadi Khalifa, Fadi al-Waidi reported injuries and later death in some reports. Hassam Shabat, Husam al-Titi, Hassan al-Kashawi, Hassan Duhan, Hassam al-Masri/Hassam al-Masri, Reuters cameraman, Ibrahim Hajjaj/Ibrahim Zahir, Ihab al-Bardini, Islam Miqdad, Islam Abed, Ismail al-Ghul, Ismail al-Besos/Mahmoud Islim al-Besos, Isam Abdullah. Note: some journalists killed in Lebanon/other theaters are included in broader counts. Jarrah Khalaf, detention/torture allegations and country of origin reporting. Joel Maroon in Lebanon. Khalid al-Madhoun, Mahmoud al-Siraj, Mahmoud Islim al-Besos, Mahmoud Islam al-Besos, Maryam Daga/Maryam Abu Daga, Marwa Muzalam, Muhammad Allah al-Sawali, Muhammad Mansour, Muhammad Salama, Muhammad Salah al-Bardawil, Muhammad Creek, Muhammad al-Khaldi, Muhammad al-Talmas, Momin Alawa, Moz Abu Taha, listed by several outlets. Muhammad Nufal, Momin Alawa, Mustafa Ayad, Mustafa Thuraya as reported earlier in war/genocide lists. Narmim Harbash, Omar Salah al-Darawi, Rabi al-Munir, Razmi Jihad Salem, Rami al-Rifi, Razmi Jihad Salem, Salem Abu Tiyor, Saad Abu Nabhan, Sahar Akram Ryan, Salah al-Jafarawi, Salem Abu Tiyor, Saad Abu Nabhan, Salah al-Jafarawi, Salah al-Jafarawi, Salem Abu Tiyor, Samir, various local names reported. Sahar Akram Ryan, Sharif Okasha, Tamer al-Zanin, Wala al-Jabari, Walid various. Wasim Qasim, Yazan al-Zuwaidi, Yahya Barzak, Ziad al-Razi. Important. This list aggregates names reported by CPJ, RSF, IFJ, Al Jazeera, Reuters and other international outlets. Spelling variants exist because Arabic names are transliterated differently across sources. For the most current and complete name lists, continuously updated with sources and circumstances, see the CPJ and RSF pages and the aggregated Wikipedia page listed below. Committee to Protect Journalists. Key sources. Check for full, updated name lists and incident details. Committee to Protect Journalists CPJ. Data pages and killed journalists dataset. Reporters Without Borders RSF. Lists and reports on journalists killed in the Israel-Gaza war. International Federation of Journalists IFJ and Palestinian Journalists Syndicate PJS. Casualty tallies and press releases. UNESCO Observatory and Director General statements condemning killings and calling for investigations. Aggregated list and chronological reporting, Wikipedia entry maintained from multiple sources. Useful as a compiled starting point. Check primary sources linked there. Final words, what this means and why it matters. Journalists are the eyes and ears for the world. When reporters die in such numbers, whether through collateral harm or because of reckless or deliberate strikes, the immediate consequence is the disappearance of independent, on-the-ground witnesses. That loss reduces transparency, hampers humanitarian responses, and erodes accountability. The factual record compiled by CPJ, RSF, IFJ, UNESCO, and many newsrooms shows a pattern that cannot be ignored. A very large number of journalists in Gaza have been killed. Many of those deaths occurred in circumstances that demand independent, international investigations. Those investigations should determine whether strikes complied with international humanitarian law and should hold to account those responsible for unlawful attacks on civilians and civilian objects.